Want to give your family or loved one the perfect gift? Then go online and check out the TornadoBodyDryer.com. I love mine and the warm heat air massage it gives me after my shower. The Tornado Body Dryer is super. You'll love it, and you'll love having one in your shower.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Good morning, everybody. This is Joe Gavalis with the Safe Senior Hour, and it is a pleasure today to have as our guest Attorney Will Johnson, who is the, we'll say, the chief attorney for the state in terms of dealing with adult abuse, neglect, and exploitation prosecutor with the Georgia Prosecuting Attorneys Council. Welcome, Will. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Joe. I appreciate it.
Well, with this time of the year, with what's going on here, the bad guys in the world are trying to take advantage of anything that they can in order to pull scams, especially in this time of kind of a total change of our society, and so we're going to cover those in a little bit about some of the recent scams or attempted scams that have been taking place. But again, I want to recommend our listeners to always remember elder abuse does not report itself, that you need to contact a professional in your area, in your state, in your community, in your country, if you suspect anything of elder abuse. And again, for our discussions on our show, we talk about elder abuse being three things: physical, institutional, and financial exploitation. So with that, Will, how about just letting our listeners get a little background about yourself and about your job and what you all do with the Georgia Prosecuting Attorneys Council, or is known as PAC here in Georgia.
Sure. So I guess I should start with, not many people probably know what the Prosecuting Attorneys Council is, right, Joe?
Right, correct.
So we are the agency that provides training and support and resources for the prosecutors, the elected district attorneys and solicitors around the state. So much like the trial lawyers have an association, the public defenders have an association, we're kind of the resources and the training for all of the district attorneys and solicitors. We do conferences, we do one-day trainings, they can call and ask us questions, we do research, we provide updates on case law as it comes out to keep them up to date, and we have a number of attorneys in our office that specialize in different things such as domestic violence or child crimes, or for me it's elder abuse. I'm specifically set for elder and disabled adult abuse.
And that covers what for our listeners basically? What do you what type of abuses do you kind of in your jurisdiction or that you're looking at?
Well, I cover, as the resource prosecutor, I'm expected to be the statewide subject matter expert in all the forms. We break it down into a number of categories under the three that you talked about. Under physical, we would have whether it's hitting someone, that kind of physical punching or
Sure.
assaulting. We also have unreasonable confinement, which is illegally restraining or chemically restraining. And we also have neglect, which is leaving someone without the resources, without the kind of food and water and care and support that they need. We also have financial in this state, and that's probably the most prevalent that we see is financial abuse. But we also, it falls into categories of sexual abuse, and what we call mental abuse.
Okay, and then you have institutional abuse also, correct?
Yes, any of those can take place in a person's private home. Scams can hit them there, but you can also have any of those same criminal forms of abuse in nursing homes, in assisted livings, in personal care homes, and any of those facilities where people live. We've learned that elder abuse happens in all settings, regardless of where a person is.
Right, and I think for our listeners, and remember our listeners are all over the United States and all over the world, Georgia, I think, is one of the unique states in the United States that have made exploitation of a senior a RICO predicate crime. Can you just let our listeners know what that means and what added tools that gives a prosecutor?
Yes. So when you say that elder abuse is a predicate crime, you mean to the big racketeering charge, what
Correct.
we call a RICO charge. And if racketeering involves some kind of scheme or scam or widespread operation of two or more conspirators, most of the listeners would probably understand it as the older racketeering act that went after mobsters and gangsters back in the day. It was to take down those kinds of operations. And by being predicate acts, it means all of our elder abuse felonies are acts that can create that kind of racketeering scheme or can create that kind of overarching description of how a complex scam took place. It lets us better define it, better explain it when there are multiple actors and it's hard to see how they relate together into an elder abuse scheme.
Let me just interject for our listeners. I would venture to say it's very rare, unless it's a relative, which is very common, but it's rare if you're having the professional scammers where it's one person. There is usually two or more people, and they usually have some kind of a organization, if not a formal one, but certainly in fact of how they operate. So this allows the prosecutors to look at it from a different point of view. I'm a retired federal agent, and I worked organized crime and labor racketeering, and we used the federal RICO statute all the time. And many of the states have developed the RICO statute, but Georgia is one of the few that have added in exploitation of the elderly as one of these acts that will enhance the punishment and enhance the power of the prosecutors. Is that a fair statement?
Correct. And it's not just the financial type of abuse, it's all kinds of abuse fall under our racketeering act.
Well, that is really, really great. And I know as I talk to other states and officials in the states, they are very interested in trying to take this type of a statute dealing with elder abuse as a racketeering, a RICO predicate act, and put it in their state statutes. It's a wonderful bit of legislation, and as a tool, I will say, I know you used it and other people have used it, I believe, right?
I'm sorry, Joe, you kind of broke up there on me. I didn't hear you.
Oh, okay. I said I know it's a tool that I know prosecutors have used, and I think you've used it in some of the matters you've worked, and or certainly that you've helped give guidance to on a prosecution. And I know it's used very extensively. I know right here in the county I'm in by the prosecutors that go after these elder abuse scam artists and or abusers. So
yes, it's not very helpful, like you said, when there's maybe a family member or one caregiver who's coming in and who starts taking stuff or helping themselves to what they shouldn't. But when you have these bigger schemes, these bigger players, and when it gets so complex and you have so many actors, that it's kind of hard to drop numerous indictments, numerous charges. It's a way to really show the whole picture of how the crime occurred.
Right. And I think if you could go over for our listeners, and I think it's very important what Georgia's done, and I believe many other states have done, is expanded the law that in terms of looking at how elders are and how they live and their they move, they might be living in some kind of a home, but the crime might have happened somewhere else. So they give the prosecutors a little more leeway in how to bring the cases. Isn't that true?
Yes. That's what we typically call venue, and it means we have to prove that the crime occurred in the county where we are charging the crime.
Right.
But we have a lot more latitude here in Georgia in that we can charge elder abuse in any county where any part of the crime occurred or where the victim lives, if it's a victim over 65 years of age or who fits under that disabled adult qualifier in the statute. That gives us a great deal of latitude to handle it, because you may have a victim who lives in way down south in Decatur, Georgia, but the scammer is up in Atlanta. And it doesn't make sense to try and take a very vulnerable, perhaps bedbound adult or elder victim all the way halfway across the state, so you could charge it there where the victim lives.
And that's important for our seniors and elders, as they get up in age. This idea where they're being hauled around for a prosecution, a lot of them just say no, but when you're able to take it where they live, it's a very significant part of the statute, and we're very happy that that's in that statute. And also there's a way, right, to expedite the taking of testimony sometimes, isn't it? Because people are elderly.
Yes, we actually have a couple of tools on that front. The one I don't like to use as much is you can file a motion to push these cases to the top of the calendar, but that really gets dicey, especially if you have jailed defendants who need priority and things like that. The better tool that we have is taking a deposition. Now, normally you think of a deposition in a civil case, but here we can provide all of the evidence to the defense attorney and do just a mini little recorded trial of the victim, their testimony, their cross-examination by the defense attorney. And if something happens to our victim, if our victim is maybe with a terminal illness or might be 95 with Alzheimer's, it gives us a tool to preserve that victim's testimony so that their voice can be heard.
Well, I think that's important that they get to hear their voice. But we'll come back and go into some of the cases that you worked on as we take our first break on the Safe Senior Hour.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction, or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
This is Daryl Pullis inviting you to listen to America's Homegrown Veggie Show right here every Saturday morning at 10 Eastern Time. Great guests, great tips, and valuable information about growing your own vegetables, fruits, and herbs.
Quick Steaks, that's Q-U-I-K steaks, are not just for surveyors. They are great for family and community gardens. Go online to www.quicksteak.com or contact your local land surveying supply dealer and get you a box of Quick Steaks. You'll love them every year when you plant your garden. Again, that's Quick Steaks, Q-U-I-K steaks, the truly preferred way to stake and identify what's in your garden now.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Well, welcome back to the second segment of the Safe Senior Hour with Joe Gavalis, and we're honored to have as our guest today Attorney Will Johnson with the Georgia Prosecuting Attorneys Council, and he is the Adult Abuse, Neglect, and Exploitation specialist that deals with these prosecutions throughout the state of Georgia. And welcome, Will. Thank you for taking part in our discussion today.
Thank you again for having me.
So we talked about before what your Prosecuting Attorneys Council does, what your job is, some of the uniqueness of the Georgia statutes. And again, as just remind our listeners, I know this goes all over the United States and all over the world, and there are different laws, and we're talking criminal statutes basically right now. We do have a bunch of civil where you can have some seizures of assets and things like that, but it's basically criminal statutes, correct, Will?
Yes. Most of what we have in Georgia are all criminal statutes. There aren't really any, on the state level, civil statutes geared towards elder abuse that you would deal with through the district attorney's offices.
Other than that, you might throw in, right, I think, don't you have some civil stuff on the RICO side where you can civilly seize things? I know the federal side.
Yes, there is some on that side, but it's not as commonly used as the criminal portion. Okay.
So let's go over now on, remember we talked about, for our listeners, that elder abuse is three types of abuse: physical, institutional, and financial exploitation. Will, can you just go in with keeping all the bounds of what you have to do as a lawyer, but let's try to give an example to our listeners, the type of cases that you've experienced or you're aware of for at least, at each of the categories. And that lets people know that these cases are real. It's not something we just say it happens. It really happens, and you got to go to trial. And when you go to trial, it's got to be, you got to convince the jurors that somebody's guilty of a crime. It's not like we can just talk about it. It's actually, you're putting your money where your mouth is, basically, and got to prove it. So, Will, can you give us? Let's start with physical. Can you know of some cases? Are you familiar with the case that might be interesting to our listeners that dealing with the physical abuse of elders?
So there are a few cases that I have handled in the past, and it includes, usually when you talk about physical, it's both at home and institutional. I know I've handled cases when I was an assistant district attorney where a resident in a care facility was sundowning, and for those that don't know, sundowning is when you have Alzheimer's or dementia, and you might be fine during the morning and the early part of the day, but as it draws into night, the person just gets really out of control, just kind of out of their mind. It's almost like a form of psychosis. And sometimes when people do that, they get more difficult to handle. Well, they always get more difficult to handle at night in a care facility. I've had cases where care workers have reached their limit and have assaulted a resident based on different things like that, the way they've struggled and they're overworked and they've lashed out suddenly. So I've charged elder abuse on cases like that. I've also seen a case, and one of my first cases was a particularly graphic one where a family was caring for a bedbound mother, and the family got, because of their own health issues, where they couldn't do it. And so the bedbound mother was just left laying in her back bedroom for weeks on end without being moved or cared for, properly fed, and given water. So on the physical side, those are kind of the things you see, those assaults, those neglects. I had another case where the victim, who is a mentally disabled adult, was locked in an upstairs room in the house, and it was because she wandered, and they had no idea. Being a regular family without any professional experience, they didn't know what to do, so they locked her in the room, which is unreasonable to do. You can't jail someone in their own house like that.
I'm very familiar with cases. We hear about it as we go talk to, and Phil and Will is one of the big participants where we go out and talk and attend meetings with law enforcement and in Georgia, in North Georgia, and exchange ideas and talk about new scams and new techniques and new types of abuses and prosecutions. And I know that when you talk about someone living in a house where somebody is supposed to take care of them, I think of one in one of the North Georgia counties where finally a neighbor said, "I haven't heard or seen Mrs. So-and-so for days, and I know her son comes once a week to feed her, but she's been bedbound." And so when finally the sheriffs, and this is important, if you have a concern, and I think Will would agree, if you have a concern about a senior, call your local law enforcement, sheriffs, and get a welfare call, right? Right, Will?
Absolutely. The police can go out and do a welfare check, and when I teach and train law enforcement, I tell them, don't just knock on the door and leave. Don't just, if someone's at the house, don't just take their word for it. You need to insist that you have to lay eyes on that person and see how they are in order to conduct the welfare check.
A great topic. And in this case, they broke into the house I'm talking about in North Georgia. The sheriffs, and the woman was was just caught up in the bed sheet, that there were bed sores. They kind of molded in with her skin. It was a horrible situation. The son, other than feeding her, and I don't know how he fed her, but once a week, never called anybody. They took her to the hospital. The county came in and condemned the house. It was so bad. And I believe she later passed, but it just shows you, if you don't see somebody or you think something's wrong, please call and get a welfare check. What Will just said is true, and I can just tell you in my neighborhood, they had a welfare check, and I was talking to the officer who came in and went just what Will said. He knocked on the door, no answer, went around the house, and finally heard in the back of the house, heard her yelling and screaming. She had fallen. She was a 91-year-old woman living alone. And he kicked the door in, and thank God he did, to get her out. I mean, she was in pain, and she was had been laying there for, like 10 hours. So God, please call. And I think what Will told the officers is so true. And thank you for that, reminding me about that, Will. Just don't knock on the door and walk away. Well, nobody answered. Very, very significant, sad situation. As we were talking about that on abuse, a lot of times we have some issues, and I think it was one here down by the airport here in Atlanta. I think a caretaker, just out of the fun of it, would go and take a cigarette and burn this dementia victim. I mean, those are the type of really horrible abuse cases that should be investigated, and those people should be tried, and if convicted, should definitely go to jail. Don't you agree, Will?
Yes. I'm sorry, you broke up just a little bit on me there.
Yeah, let me try to get a little better. Is that any better?
A little bit, yeah. But those are the kind of cases, and I don't want the listeners to be terrified. The really graphic, horrible cases are not the most commonplace ones. They occur, we see them, we handle them, and there's usually, and this is one of the things I've discovered, there's always some kind of mitigating or intervening issue. You have a family member who has a drug addiction, you have mental health issues within the family. It's very rare to find someone who is just truly sadistic and evil, that they would torture someone. There's usually some kind of intervening problem in the family. One case I handled, I had generations of Adult Protective Services complaints in that family. Adult Protective Services being the ones that come out from the administrative side and investigate those things and see if they can help. So those are not the most commonplace, but where they occur, you need to look for, or as a prosecutor, I have to look at the fact that in some of those situations, I'm probably going to be playing both social worker as well as prosecutor in that case.
Right, and I think that's very, very fair. And I tell people, law enforcement and prosecutions are not a half-hour TV show or an hour TV show. It takes a lot of hard work by the investigators, a lot of hard work by the prosecutors, and it is truly a team effort. And you heard Will just talk about Adult Protective Services. There's something like that, if not in that name, in every state in the United States. And so, and I'm sure there's something similar in other countries in the world that have that. So, you know, there's places to file complaints. And again, if there's something that bothers you, please say something, because you might be able to help somebody. And a lot of times it's just self-neglect where there's no prosecution. Correct, Will?
Yes, there are a number of those cases, and one of the things I've noticed is they will the people that look into those and investigate them, or people that come across them, don't really know what to do, because you see something that horrific and that terrible, you think, well, my goodness, somebody needs to be held accountable. But sometimes it's just someone who has gotten to the point, either from depression or from their own issues, or they're elderly and can't do it anymore, or just unable to care for themselves. And I always made sure that I developed a list of resources so that I could say, okay, well, you need to check here, like with an area agency on aging that provides support and resources for a person. You need to go to Adult Protective Services and do something immediate.
Right, and I see that as you talk about, there are several places to look, and we're going to go in a little more detail after we take our second segment break here on the Safe Senior Hour.
Want to give your family or loved one the perfect gift? Then go online and check out the TornadoBodyDryer.com. I love mine and the warm heat air massage it gives me after my shower. The Tornado Body Dryer is super. You'll love it, and you'll love having one in your shower.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down docs4patientcarefoundation.org. That's DOCS, the number 4, patientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
Whether cruising the strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, you need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the americasbroadcastnetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Well, welcome back to the third segment of the Safe Senior Hour with Joe Gavalis. And today we have our guest, Attorney Will Johnson with the Georgia Prosecuting Attorneys Council, known as PAC here in Georgia. And Will is there, which makes him one of the state experts on adult abuse, neglect, and exploitation as a prosecutor. And Will, thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be with you.
We were talking about types of abuse of cases that you've seen or you've helped to have some guidance on, and we were talking about the physical abuse type cases, and you gave some examples. And again, that you were speaking before we took our break of some non-law enforcement type people, but people that could help. Could you go over that again? Because these are in every state, some form of it in the United States.
Sure. We have what's called the Area Agency on Aging, and they kind of oversee programs to help and assist vulnerable adults and people who need a little extra help. There's a group here in Georgia, the area, or in Middle Georgia where I live, the Middle Georgia Regional Commission and the Area Agency on Aging, and they were absolutely fantastic to work with. They helped on our multidisciplinary team and were kind of the driving force behind it. You can also, if more immediate assistance or greater levels of assistance are needed, you know, the AAA is designed maybe to provide transportation to help with food and meals, but they're not designed if someone has reached a level where it's an emergency. That needs to be reported to Adult Protective Services or whatever version of Adult Protective Services you have in your state. And usually you can just Google for that number and you'll find it.
And also, report to your law enforcement person. If something bothers you that you think is a horrible situation, that they will refer it to the proper people, or they will go out and say, well, there's no case, but it's a matter we'll refer, or we'll work with Adult Protective, or try to get some kind of help if they can. So that's very good information for people out there. So you need to look for that. We're going to go into another type of abuse we're going to talk about now is financial exploitation. And again, we started earlier by mentioning that this is the most prominent type of abuse against seniors, and the most prominent group that exploits seniors, unfortunately, are relatives or loved ones. Is that pretty much what your understanding is, Will?
Yes, I've found the bulk of the cases you get will be financial, and part of that is because they're just reported more frequently, have greater channels of reporting. Here in Georgia, financial institutions are required to report any suspicious activity on a vulnerable adult or elder person's account. You can see it reported from people managing the account, from family members who look in and see something is wrong. But also greed is a major motivator for our criminals in this country and in this state.
Well, and internationally, I mean, because crime doesn't, these criminals, states, cities, counties, countries don't mean a thing to them. It takes place all over the world.
That's a very good point. We talk about counties and venue, which is where the case occurred, what county it occurred in, jurisdiction, who has jurisdiction over the case to prosecute it and handle it, investigate it, but criminals don't abide by that. That's a construct of us as the state. So you're right. One of the biggest challenges is where these people are, where we go to get them. Do we have to bring them in from another country because it's an international scam? The financial cases can be very daunting to investigate and prosecute.
And I think, and I know you're one of the leaders of that here, certainly in the state, is the idea of having this community of investigative resources and prosecutorial resources working together from the local level, as simple as some of these situations on code enforcement or fire codes, all the way up to working with the state DA or the solicitor here in Georgia, or working with the U.S. Attorney's Office as things spread out. And that's why we try to have monthly meetings or meetings at least quarterly throughout the state, so everybody gets to work with one another. And I think, and you're one of the primary people behind, keeping this going, and I applaud you for that.
Thank you. And one of the biggest things we've done in this state, and what I learned in the short time I've been at PAC, is we cannot do elder crime, we cannot fight it without our agency partners. We need adult protective services in this state to come in and provide the support. We need healthcare facility regulation to help determine whether a place is properly licensed and properly meeting requirements. We need the GBI to provide help and support in larger cases. We need local law enforcement, the sheriffs and the police associations and the district attorneys and solicitors to all take a very strong, engaging hand, and community partners as well. And that's one of the reasons I was so pleased about Representative Sharon Cooper, who I believe has been on your show before.
Yes.
I was so pleased that she fought so hard with us to get a bill outlining multidisciplinary teams, which bring all these actors and people to the table so that we can talk about what's going on, so that we can share information, so that we can work together as one large team addressing holistically the needs of our vulnerable community.
Right, and that's good, but just let our listeners know, when you said GBI, that's the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
Yes.
And
sorry, I forget it's nationwide.
Right,
Georgia
right.
Bureau of Investigation.
And these multiple
group to that.
these multiple disciplinary teams are very effective, but they're basically case by case in the judicial district, correct? And in Georgia, we have how many judicial districts?
They are, and we have, I believe, 49.
Right.
But it's a little different, though, because every county can have a solicitor if they want to. Some have part-time solicitors, and some, the DA's office, acts as both and the solicitor prosecutes the misdemeanors, the DA prosecutes the felonies. So there aren't solicitors in every single county, but I believe there are 49 judicial circuits with district attorneys.
Right, and that's very significant. And they go in and that's where they really ingest and digest the case, and they bring all the resources to work on that case. And that's the advantage of these multiple disciplinary teams. To complement that, we do what the North Georgia Elder Abuse Task Force does. We bring people from multi-jurisdictions in and discuss various scams and various situations in their areas to let other people know what's going on, and they exchange ideas, investigative tips, how to do it, and the idea of, there aren't that many people working elder abuse type cases. And if they all work together, they're able to help people save time and get to the perpetrators, and that's been very successful. And that's how they marry up, because you want the cases to be investigated thoroughly, but also you want to have the heads up of things that are happening or help try to locate somebody, because we go back to it. Counties and cities and states don't mean a thing to these criminals at all.
Exactly.
And what you might see in one area, person shows up in another area. We're going to go into some of the financial scams you've seen, but right now everybody should be aware of the coronavirus, and I think I'm just going to I'm just going to let everybody know this is not just the possibility for scams is very real. And there are various and numerous types of scams. And Will, you chime in, but here are some of the scams that our Federal Trade Commission says that's the federal group that looks at various civil and potentially criminal scams that take place against everyone in America, but particularly the elderly. And some of the scams they say related to the coronavirus are growing. Some scammers are promising that you can refinance your mortgage or get student loan debt forgiveness for a fee, of course.
Yeah.
You might spot phishing scams. Phishing is where they just they go out and just try to throw out various deals, make maybe 100 calls and hope somebody, bites. It's like fishing, like you're hunting for fish. And one of them is where the scammers try to get your Social Security number or financial information. And that may be to guarantee you access to a COVID-19 vaccine. And I think we got to remind everybody there is still no vaccine that's on the market. So you're not going to have any access to it if you entered into by giving their Social Security number. They might say they're from Medicare. They're not. Medicare is not going to call you. They'll write you and try to get your information.
Exactly.
They might say they have a health kit that they can sell you from the CDC. Again, that's not real. They might say that they have a vaccine kit, which is not real. Or the Social Security Administration tells you there's a problem with your Social Security number. There's not. I've received those calls personally. But these are the type of scammers that come in and and then they'll go to some of their favorite scams. Now we're talking about the United States, but I do want to address, and this comes from the Baker Fraud Report, and there's just some headlines that he has, and it's a great website to go to, the Baker Fraud Report. But for example, police in Turkey arrests 5 and seize 1 million counterfeit masks. And if anybody's been watching the news or listening to the news or reading about the news, these masks are very important. And here they seized a counterfeit, 1 million of them. United Kingdom's Action Fraud Unit says virus scams complaints went up 400% in March. The Canadian Prime Minister warns of scams exploiting emergency government benefits. Social Security here in the United States warns letters are going out, supposedly from the Social Security Administration, threatening to suspend benefits, has victims call a number and often ask them to buy gift cards. What's your thoughts on gift cards and government agencies, Will?
That doesn't happen.
Right. So if somebody wants payment by gift cards to pay a government agency, that's a big red flag, correct?
It's a huge red flag. People need to remember, don't let someone into your home who just shows up to want to give you a coronavirus test.
Right.
Don't provide your Medicare, Social Security, banking information to anyone over the phone unless you called them to purchase something. Anyone who solicits, don't give them that information.
Right.
Send them away, call and check and find out. I cannot stress enough how important it is to be suspicious in this day and age.
Right. Right. Unfortunately, that's what we've come to. If you don't recognize the number, don't answer it. With that, we're going to have to take our break here from our third segment, but we'll be back with some more tips about how to combat and prevent yourself being a victim of scams.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
Whether cruising the strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, you need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
This is America's Web Radio. Would you like to have a show, talk about your business, or express your opinion on America's Web Radio? Just email gm@americaswebradio.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Well, welcome back to our final segment of the Safe Senior Hour with Joe Gavalis, and our guest today is Will Johnson, attorney with the Georgia Prosecuting Attorneys Council, and Will is the specialist dealing with adult and at-risk adults abuse, neglect, and exploitation type crimes. And Will, thank you for being on, and we appreciate what you do and what your fellow prosecutors do, and everybody in law enforcement, and especially on this day and everybody who are first responders dealing with the coronavirus and the medical people and everybody. It's just it really is an honor to know people and to be working with people who are out there. God bless you all. I do have a couple more tips on the coronavirus issue. That in Michigan, the Attorney General sent cease and desist letters to companies selling patch to prevent virus. Well, there is no patch to prevent virus, these are things that we need to keep reminding people here. So let's just give a little tips in this day of scams, and everybody's at home, and I know you want to talk on the phone, but let's just go over that again, Will. If you get a phone call, what's your advice?
I would not answer a phone call if you don't know who it is. These people are very well trained in what they do. I made the mistake, I wanted to be the cutesy little prosecutor like you see. People want to answer the phone and kind of aggravate and go back and forth with these folks. And when I answered the phone and I started the little rigmarole trying to get their goat, they fired back, whoever was on the phone, and it was a fake Washington number. They fired back what my name, full name, my address, my phone number, and my mother's maiden name were.
Wow.
And it scared me. They know about you. They're trying to pretend to get your information. They don't have that final link, usually your credit card number, your bank account number, or your social security number. And the trick is, do not answer the phone if you do not know who it is. Let them leave a message.
Right, and why we keep saying that, and this is just the way it is when we're dealing with the professional scammers, which are about 45 or 50% of the financial exploitation type cases, depending on what survey you read. But here's what happens, and I know it's great, as Will just said. It's just it'd be nice to the batter back and forth with them. But here's what happens. Your numbers are sold on the dark web, and people have it, or it just comes out, and there's a boiler. They call it a boiler room. And again, Will, correct me if I'm wrong on any of these things, or chime in, where there might be 10 or 100 people sitting in a room, and they're just there's a machine that dials, or they automatically dial the numbers that come up. A lot of times they're in overseas, like Jamaica or Nigeria or other places all over. We're starting to see things now out of the Far East. So, but they're sitting in there, and they bought this number, and they don't care whether they get you, because they think they're going to get one of 100 calls they make. But there's a list that's kept, and this comes from people who've been arrested, and they tell the investigators what happened. And there's 3 lists that are kept and that are in the industry. One is a list where a number's called and nobody answered, is exactly what Will says. Don't answer it if you don't know. They can't pull a scam on somebody if they can't talk to them. Number 2 are the people who will talk to them but won't take part in the scam. And I think we'll agree, these people are professional. They do it every day, 8 hours or 10 hours a day. And they think they can out-professional you. And all it takes is one of you, right, to make a mistake.
And they are very professional at this. They will get you to slip up and say something that you don't intend to. Like if they're missing your middle name, they'll call you the wrong name, and you'll give away the information that's not my name.
Right.
And then they know, and they can go to their list and figure out more closely what your name might be.
Right. And then the third list, of course, is the list that people who have talked to them and have bought into the scam. And, okay, so you've been taken by one scam, but that doesn't end there, does it, Will?
No. They'll know. I firmly believe, I have no proof of this, but I firmly believe that if someone falls for the scam, they somewhere red alert that name and number so that other people know to target this person. And these kinds of data sale crimes are not new. When I started at the district attorney's office in Macon, Georgia, in 2013, I had cases from 2012. That's 8 years ago now. I had cases from 2012 where they had purchased all sorts of people's credit card numbers and were loading them onto blank vanilla Visa cards to see if they would work. So these things of data sales are not new. The problem is they're getting more professional and more secure in what they know to do and the scams that they're pulling.
Well, you look at it that they sell this, and I know on one of the cases that I'm familiar with is a gentleman, and this is something we talk about, a romance scam. And I don't know if these are scams that take place, and the elderly are one of the biggest victims. Both, by the way, equally male and female. But after they got this gentleman hooked for about $75,000, he tried to get out of it. Well, his name was passed on to somebody else, this case another woman, who came out a roundabout, and it was through a dating service or claimed she was on a dating website or something. But she ended up getting the information from the perpetrators who had dealt with this gentleman, and he was concerned. I remember he said, "How did she know about me?" I said, "Because they sell it. They give it to their friends or their other people. There are different groups, and they figure if you don't want to do business anymore in the scam business with this woman, they'll do it again maybe you'll do it with this woman." Well, it didn't go there. He didn't buy into that. He didn't partake in any more conversations with her. Well, then the next scam came. Somebody called him and said he was with the Federal Bureau of Detectives. Well, there is no Federal Bureau of Detectives. But his pitch was, "I heard that you're concerned about that you might have been taken for some money, and we're here to help you. But we need some upfront money as bait money." So, I mean, it just goes on and on. It's like you don't get away from it until you just totally don't answer the phone or don't answer the messages. So I think that's good advice, right, Will?
Yes, and I'll never forget how devastating this is. I had a case, one of my last ones before I left the DA's office, was a 80-something-year-old victim, and she had been so persistently scammed and targeted, I think it was hundreds of thousands of dollars, that when I tried to call and speak to her as the prosecutor on the case, her family would not let me talk to her unless they listened in and until I had sent a letter on letterhead showing who I was and that I was, in fact, the assistant district attorney handling the case.
Well, I think we're passing out, and you put out some good advice, and as we tend to wrap up here, I'm going to just go over a few things, and will you chime in? One, don't answer a phone that you don't know. And if they leave a message, you independently call that government agency or state agency or whatever company they say they were with. I'm thinking something like a software scam. If somebody said they're from Microsoft, you independently call Microsoft, or you independently call a bank. Those are things that help protect you from what you were involved in. The other point is, if you're living alone, and in this day and age, I know it's crazy, but if you're living alone, don't let anybody inside your house you don't know. It just sounds pretty obvious, but it's just great, because once people are in your house, especially if you're living alone, you can't get them out. It's hard to do that. So, talk through the door, and as a law enforcement telling me, if you got to yell through the door, yell through the door. And it used to be the idea, well, just pretend you're not there. Well, and if you're there alone, well, they might come around the back of the house and break in. So by you talking to them, they know you're there, and that they're not, most of these people don't want to confront a person, especially that don't want to be there. And just tell them, please, I'm not interested, go away, and then call your local law enforcement. Say, I have a suspicious person at my door. I don't know who it is. But these are good tips. Anything else you have before we wrap up here, Will?
The biggest thing is, do not hand out your personal information to anyone. I don't care how insistent they are, what agency they say they're with, where they're from. Don't give your information out. Hang up on them. Leave it alone. Go away from it.
Right, and we spoke earlier, and I think we'll concur, if somebody that claims they're from the government wants you to pay something, and he wants you to pay through a card like a iTunes card or a Blue Dot card or a Green Dot card or something like that, the government doesn't get paid that way. The government wants real cash or a personal check that they can check on, and you make it out to that entity. So please don't get caught up. And you'll see cases all over the place where people are buying like $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 worth of iTunes cards. So with that, I want to thank you, Will, for coming on. We were about to leave the Safe Senior Hour. And Will, thank you for being on as a guest. And remember, everybody out there, elder abuse does not report itself. Please stay safe and healthy.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.